Being a venture capital funded startup seems to be a badge of honor to startups these days. Reading TechCrunch and seeing all these startups raise big from famous investors gives you the impression that it's not only easy, but it's actually just the normal thing to do. Now, TechCrunch actually wrote a blog in 2020 stating that they only actually write about startup fundraising because one, people actually click and read in those blogs, and two, it's more interesting than talking about the grind that founders go through all the time. So raising is not normal and it's not sexy. The question you should be asking isn't when or how much you should be raising, but if you should be raising in the first place. Now, there are a whole lot of other options and a whole lot of founders who don't raise, who are actually making money, only they don't get talked about. Now, being a fundraising advisor for your purposes, you might actually find it ironic that I'm on a mission to educate founders not to raise at all. That's only part of it though. I want founders to raise if there is a compelling logic and they're able to do so if it will benefit them. Now, before I tell a founder if they are fundable, I want to discuss whether you should be raising at all. Now, if you haven't raised before, you simply have no idea how much fundraising really sucks. I repeatedly prepare my pitch deck clients for the shitstorm they're about to face, and they listen, but they don't get it. It's only a month in that they'll email me and say, I understood what you were telling me, Alex, but I didn't think you were serious. Man, oh man, raising sucks. And that was a real quote, by the way. But one of the reasons you shouldn't raise if you don't need to, or if you're unlikely to be successful, is how much it sucks and how much time it is going to take out of the things that you could otherwise be spending on your company. The rejection is constant. You're going to lose motivation, you're going to lose confidence, but more than that, you stop focusing on your startup and you suffer financially. Now, ironically, venture capital investors actually look for startups that are growing whilst you are raising. Seriously. So if you do not need to raise, you should not do it. If you are not fundable, you should not raise. But if you are one of those rare companies who has the potential to raise in strong terms and you know how to spend the money, it can do you wonders. Only it could also kill your startup if you do things wrong, which is all too often the case. Now, there are ways to know if you are fundable. It just requires a diverse set of knowledge and experience, which pretty much no one is willing to put in work to develop for themselves. Now, I talk to a lot of founders, and one thing I repeatedly find myself saying is fundable startups are fundable. To me, it just became obvious. If you are fundable, you will be able to raise money from investors. If you aren't top-in-class startup, you will not be able to raise money from investors. The obvious question, of course, is, well, how do I know if I'm fundable? Well, that question, my friend, is a really hard answer to give. The ability to give an answer is entirely based on a feel, that you develop after tracking startups for years, seeing who succeeds, seeing who fails, and understanding business models. I took a stab at explaining fundable startups are fundable on my blog, alexanderjarvis.com, if you want to check that out. All right. Since I've given advice to founders for years, I figured out that I'm pretty much spot on as to whether or not a startup will be able to raise. But there are a lot of variables. The biggest one, though, is the drivers that you, the founders, have. One guy I know spent 18 months raising and finally found folks to give him the money. Man, that is grueling. I told him that he's unlikely going to be able to raise as his business model has some flaws, but he didn't listen to me and he didn't give up, and that he would make it happen. So he managed to raise, great, but the startup's dead for the exact reasons that I told him a couple of years before. So I never give certainties when I give advice about whether or not you are fundable. I can just tell you if you're more or less likely to. There are, of course, startups that just simply have no hope and the founders have no clue. Only then can I pretty much tell you straight up, probably need to kind of focus a little bit more. So if you aren't fundable, it's not just about your traction. If you've been able to raise a round or two, you've been doing something right. It doesn't mean you'll get an exit though. When I tell founders they aren't likely to raise, it's because they have an issue with their business model. That's something you can fix, but only if you're willing to put in the work and to change things. Now, I can tell you if you are fundable, If you aren't fundable, I can tell you what's wrong with your business model, which you can opt to work on with me too if you want. If you have doubts you'll be able to raise, you might actually be right. But you can book a call with me and I'll tell you what I think you should actually do. It might be to build more traction, or it might be to hit the funding trail immediately. Either way, I'll give you my insights into investors and what to do next. So, book a call. Let's do this. Let's make a massive change. Keep hustling, guys. Bye.